That's really interesting stuff. So you talked about C.S. Lewis and some other authors kind of working you out of Calvinism, kind of challenging your beliefs. Could you talk a little bit about like what were kind of like some of the first things that made you start to question Calvinism, where you're like, hey, I actually might be wrong about this doctrine?
Well, that's probably a bigger question than we have time for, because it's not just one thing, but there were many things that just kind of began to kind of splinter my concept and understanding of the Calvinistic system. For example, when I really began to understand the concept of judicial hardening, that really began to make me question how Calvinism fits with what we would know as judicial hardening. And for your audience, what that is there's a sense in which one can grow hardened or stubborn in their rebellion. And all of us probably know people like this who have rejected the gospel for so long in their life that they're completely calloused and cut off to it. I mean, they mock the gospel. It is just completely something they wouldn't even consider. Now, if you could go back in time and find them when they were 8, 9, 10, 15 years old or whatever, you probably would have found somebody who was more receptive and maybe their heart was a little softer, a little more willing to listen and learn, and they grew calloused over a period of time. Well, that can happen to any of us. The Bible warns in Hebrews 4:7 that when you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And this hardening process can definitely take place. And we're not born already hardened and blinded and deaf to the truth of who God is, but we can certainly become that if we grow hardened in our rebellion. Well, judicial hardening, this is an active choice of God as a judge. That's what's called judicial. Judicial just means an act of a judge. So judicial hardening would be the act of God as a judge, and he's sovereign, meaning he has the right to rule as he wants to. If he wants to cut somebody off in their rebellion, for example, he brings them light, they reject it, he brings them light again, they reject it, he brings them light again, they reject it over and over and over, and they just continue to reject. Eventually, he just says, okay, I'm not going to bring you light anymore. I'm cutting you off. I'm going to let you go your own way. That's judicial hardening. That's what that means. We see this with Pharaoh, for example. He was already a rebellious man. He already hated the God of Israel. It wasn't like God had to make him that way or causally determine him to be that way. So when Moses shows up, he's already stubborn and in rebellion. But the Bible talks about sometimes Pharaoh hardening his own heart, but it also sometimes speaks about God hardening his heart. And what that's talking about is this judicial hardening. The word hardening in the original language literally means to strengthen one in their resolve. And what God is ultimately doing, in my estimation, is he's giving Pharaoh over to his own rebellious, calloused ways and sealing him off in that rebellion so as to accomplish his own purpose, God's own purpose, by making his power known through the plagues there in Egypt, because each one of those plagues represented God's power over the false Egyptian gods. And so God's displaying his power through the blindness and the stubbornness of Pharaoh. And so if turning the Nile into blood, for example, might have convinced him to say finally, okay, I'll let him go because I don't want any more blood in my water, then God wouldn't have accomplished all of the plagues to demonstrate his power. So he blinds him. Now, we're not told exactly how he blinds him or how he hardens his heart. It could be like the movie portrays with Charlton Heston. I can't pronounce his name, but you know who I'm talking about. Where the woman whispers in his ear and says something like, "You're not going to let Moses get the best of you," or something like that, are you? Or the magician's coming up to him, "No, we can do these tricks. These are just parlor tricks. This is not a big deal." God, whatever means God used, we're not really told. But God hardens his heart. He strengthens him in his resolve. Why? So as to accomplish his purpose. His power was displayed through that, and he accomplished the first Passover. Now, what's beautiful about this, Zach, is it's such a parallel to what happens in the New Testament. So in the same way that Pharaoh was hardened to accomplish the first Passover, we see Israel as a nation is hardened in order to accomplish the second Passover. And so God's not causing Israel to be the way they are. God's not rejecting Israel just for no apparent reason before they're ever born. God is actually giving already hardened people over to their hardened condition and blinding them in their rebellion so they don't even recognize their own Messiah. This is why you see in Romans 11, it says, God sent them a spirit of stupor, eyes so that they could not see, ears so that they could not hear. And he did this in order to bring about the Passover, to bring about redemption through the cross, so that all the families of the earth could be blessed, because that's the original promise he made to Abraham, that through your seed, the Messiah would come, and that all the nations of the earth would be blessed through you. Once I got that, once that clicked with me, then a lot of the verses that Calvinists were plucking out of their context, like Romans 9 through 11, and so many other verses, really didn't make sense within that worldview anymore, because I recognized that they're not born because of the fall of Adam in this hardened, callous, dead-like condition. They have become that way because of their choice to rebel. And God has given them over and sealed them into their rebellious, callous condition in order to accomplish a purpose through them. And those are the ones who are crying out, why are you blaming me, God? If my unrighteousness brings out your glory, then why are you to blame me, as he says in Romans 3? That's the interlocutor or the objector in the mind of Romans 9. And once I got that, it just kind of like the scales fall off my eyes, so to speak, to go, oh, okay, well, I don't need Calvinism anymore. I don't have to swallow that difficult pill of God reprobating most of humanity before they're ever born for reasons unknown. I didn't need that anymore, because I had a better explanation that was, I think, a lot more theologically sound, and that really helped to comport so much of what Scripture seems to teach about God's love and provision for every person.